Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we're back with another innovator interview. We want to talk today about sustainability in business and what drives people to do interesting things in waste reduction in their businesses, and also how you stay motivated in the face of climate change as an existential challenge. We're speaking with Caspar Poyck, who's the co-founder and Senior Director of Plant Operations at Flying Embers. They're a flavored hard kombucha company that was founded back in 2016. The company ran into, it literally, rather than ran into it, it was run into by the 2017 Thomas Fire in Ojai, California, which was the largest wildfire in the state, the state's history at the time, and burned 281,000 acres. That's 440 square miles. It reshaped the mission of the team. They had a different name, but they decided to rename the company Flying Embers Hard Kombucha in honor of the firefighters and the struggle that they went through. Now, they do some really interesting things to reduce their environmental impact. Not only do they donate food and equipment to firefighters and first responders in various climate-caused disaster areas in California, Oregon, and Texas, for instance, they are reusing the CO2 that is emitted by their fermentation process to put the fizz in their drinks. So instead of going and buying industrially manufactured CO2 and letting the fermentation CO2 get away, they're using that CO2 to make their drinks. Now that's a reflection of the opportunity to be efficient in everything we do, particularly in our businesses, where a lot of our CO2 emissions in society are emitted. And so we wanted to talk to Caspar about Flying Embers generally and why they kept going in the face of this disaster. Welcome to the show, Caspar. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm doing really well. Thank you.
Well, so first, tell us about your hard kombucha. It's available in a variety of flavors and different levels of alcohol content. I associate kombucha with kind of a specific tart and earthy flavor, but your products feature flavors like pineapple, ginger, black cherry. What inspired your team to start the company and particularly to focus on flavored kombucha?
Our CEO, Bill Moses, formerly ran a company called Kivita, which is a regular kombucha company, a non-alcoholic kombucha company, which he eventually sold to Pepsi. Mm-hmm. And so coming from that world, he'd already put a lot of time into developing a beverage that not only is probiotic and good for you, but is also more palatable to a large audience. He started that company with an idea that was his wife's friend was a nutritionist in our town, Ojai. It's a town that is, for those in California, fairly well known for wellness, like yoga retreats, macrobiotic food, biodynamic farming. So it's a town where there's a lot of emphasis on health and healthy lifestyles. So this friend of Bill's wife's, she was a nutritionist who made kombucha at home. Mm-hmm. But the old style of kombucha is a very tart, very acidic flavor. It's ultimately it's a vinegar made from tea. So people would drink it for its health benefits and kind of take the flavor for, accepted the flavor, so to speak, because they knew that the health benefits were so important. Mm-hmm. During the time at Kivita, they worked much more toward, okay, well, is there a way that we keep the authenticity of the beverage intact while also making it a flavor palette that is more accessible to a larger audience, which is what they achieved.
Well, so can you describe the taste or the sensation of drinking a flavored kombucha? How does the fruit flavor interact with that tart undercurrent in your beverage?
One of the things that we pride ourselves on here at Flying Embers is that we approach the flavor design in the way that a chef would approach a well-balanced meal. When you look at, we also do seltzers, for instance, and when you look at some of the initial brands that came out and brought seltzer to a wider audience, they'll have very, I would almost say monotone flavors, right? You have a watermelon, and that's just a watermelon flavor, and you have a raspberry, and it's just a raspberry flavor, which is fine, and it was a great way to introduce people to what a seltzer can be. we feel like we're taking the next step and saying, okay, well, in the same way that when you're a child, you start off with very basic flavors or you recognize very basic colors, as you mature and as your palate matures, you go and look for more subtlety, you look for more complexity, and you look for more composition of flavors. And that's what we try to do with our Flying Embers flavors, both in the kombucha and the seltzer, is combining, let's have a little bit of earthiness, a little bit of fruitiness, and a little bit of spice, for instance. So how do you combine an earthy flavor with a berry and a pepper, for instance? So for us, it's all about composing a well-balanced, wider palette.
Well, it's really interesting, the range of flavors that you guys describe. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask about is in 2017, you almost lost the company and its headquarters to the Thomas Fire. And you literally renamed your company, Flying Embers, to describe what you all saw. But what was it like to watch a business that you've been working hard on for more than a year threatened by climate change in such an immediate way?
Yeah, at that point, because we're really a bootstrapped, pardon the pun, organically grown company, and what at that time was headquarters really was just a corner in Bill's winery. Mm-hmm. Bill also has a winery in Ojai called Casa, and in a corner of the wine storage is where we had an R&D lab and where we were starting to play with initial flavor design and fermentation processes and culturing up our own kombucha culture that is specific to our brand. So that was being done there. So that's really the extent of what we would call a headquarters. It really was just, this is our home base and this is where we're starting off.
Sure.
At that time, we had an umbrella name, which we still keep intact corporately, which is called Fermented Sciences. And so Flying Embers became the brand for our kombucha and seltzer. And so when the fire came, I grew up in the Netherlands. I grew up in the countryside. I grew up very much a country boy. So I was very used to setting stuff on fire and playing with fire. I was, a little bit of a kid version of a pyromaniac, And when I say that, obviously I'm not talking about, psychiatrically a pyromaniac, but just a kid who likes to play with fire. So I've always felt really comfortable and really at ease with fire, and I feel like I can understand fire fairly well. I understand where the fuels are, where the oxygen supply is, where the temperatures will draw the flame to next. Mm-hmm. But when you have a fire of that size and magnitude coming at you, it's a whole different beast. It's a very intimidating experience. And so the property sits on a creek bed, a barranca, hence the name Casa Barranca. Mm-hmm. And it's a 1909 Green and Green Brothers designed arts and crafts bungalow. It's a heritage home, California historic home. So it has a lot of history, it has a lot of value, not just monetarily. And standing on the edge of the barranca and looking toward what we call the east end, which is the east end of our valley, and seeing the fires come toward us. Periodically, you see it hit markers that you recognize. Oh, it's at that water tower, and I know that water tower is on Signal right. Street, so now I know it's this far away from it. So you see the fire coming toward you, and it initially, when something like that happens, for me, it was like, oh my goodness, it's going to be here any minute now. And it kind of reminded me of when my daughter's mother went into her initial contractions for labor. That was my first time and only time becoming a father, but your mind, at least my mind went to, oh my goodness, contractions means labor. So if she's having contractions now, that means 5 minutes from now, there's going to be labor happening. And it turned out to take hours and hours and hours. A very similar thing happened with this fire. You see this fire and the thought is, oh, we got to get ready because it'll be here an hour from now. Well, it ended up taking a few days. So this fire for days, you see it coming toward you. And at nighttime, you can see, pardon me?
A wall of flame, I would imagine.
A wall of flame and a shape of fire that I had never seen in my life before. It was, at one point, it was a very, very angular, pyramidic shape of fire, and it roared like a monster.
Mhm.
And it got maybe 500 yards away from us. That's the closest it got. And there was I don't want to get too mystical on it, but there was a feeling where we felt that there is something happening here. It's very strange. This fire has been coming toward us for 3 days straight. And by the time it was facing us, the wind turned and it went uphill from us. And then it had gone up maybe half a mile uphill. And then it took another right turn and actually continued behind us, parallel to what it would have done had it come through us. It went up the hill parallel to us and then came back down again. So it kind of made a U shape around the property. And it has done that once before. I forget when it was. I think it was in the 60s or something like that. I don't know for sure, but I know that it happened at one point in time in a very similar way.
So now, how does Flying Embers get involved in climate disaster areas now? Because I know you've done things after the Alameda fire in Oregon and also in Texas recently. What does Flying Embers do to support first responders?
Once you have first responders come help you out that up close, and once you've felt the danger and the reality of it sets in so intimately, it really brings another level of respect for the work first responders do. So first of all, of course, we got our name, Flying Embers, from the nighttime ember beds. And we started a foundation, a 501c3, and we have a key focus that we call Rewild. Mm-hmm. And we focus on fire and disaster prevention. We plant trees, we do area cleanups, and then, like you said, we actually directly support firefighters with equipment and food, and we do a 1% give back of our profits.
Now, you had this sort of sublime experience of the fire diverting itself around your founding location. How did that reshape your thinking about what Flying Embers does, what the beverage industry does, and particularly your choices about how you package and make your product?
Yeah, I think my uncle in the 70s actually started a political party in the Netherlands, which is where I'm from, that also focused on green initiatives. And then another uncle of mine was an independent journalist and especially focused on environmental issues and ombudsman issues. I'm also the son of 2 yoga teachers. So I feel that from a very early age, awareness around what are resources, and we treat them as if they're infinite, but obviously they are finite. Right. And what are we doing to the environment that we live in? And a funny parallel is once we start culturing up a kombucha, at some point, the product that the kombucha bacteria make is an acid, and eventually their waste product, their acid, becomes so overwhelming that they kill themselves. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the alcohol, right? So the yeast eats sugar and exhausts CO2 and alcohol. Well, eventually it creates an environment that is so alcoholic that it kills itself. And in a parallel way, us humans are doing a very similar thing. We create beautiful things, but we also create waste products. And eventually, if we don't stop, the lesson is shown everywhere in nature that we will pollute our own petri dish and stop our own growth and maybe even kill ourselves. So I think it's something to very much take seriously.
So you guys have started to do things with what used to be waste products, particularly the CO2 that is emitted when kombucha is brewing. How does that process work? What did the naturally made CO2 replace?
For me, it was very funny so we started this company with 4 people. There's a CEO who's focused on business development and money. We have a vice president who's based in marketing and relationships, and then we have a fermenter, product designer, Sam Tolberg, and then myself. And I became the guy who pretty much built the place. And with that, very much because we started so small, it's like how can I reuse that piece of lumber? How can I reuse that piece of EMT piping? How can I make the most of the limited resources that I have. It's sort of my mentality.
Mhm.
And we're fermenting and we're off gassing CO2. You see the CO2 bubble out and go into the atmosphere. And then you turn 90 degrees to the other side and you're purchasing CO2 to carbonate with.
Right.
I was like, wow, this is kind of strange. Over here, I'm throwing CO2 away, and over here, I'm buying it. So why am I not using the CO2 that I'm throwing away? And in the brewing world, there are breweries that capture their CO2. It is not uncommon to do, but this is more in the beer world. And usually the ROI only makes sense if you're a very large brewery and you're working in very large volumes. I was lucky to find a company out of Austin, Texas called Earth911 Labs, and they have made it available for craft breweries to capture their CO2. So they became our partners in this, and we are now able to capture the CO2 that naturally comes off of our fermentation, capture it, chill it down, put it in a dewar tank, and then when we need it, we can draw from it on demand. The added benefit of it, the surprising benefit of it, was that we had previously never looked at CO2 as an ingredient. We'd never thought of it as a flavor. We only thought, oh, CO2 is something you do post-production. You're done with your product, and now you want to give it some fizz.
Right.
Never really thinking that, wait a second, this thing that we're using for fizz actually has its own flavor and actually has an effect on the existing flavors.
Well, and that was what I was going to ask. Is you told me in a recent call that the natural CO2 has a different flavor, that the industrial CO2 was sort of metallic tasting. What does the natural CO2 taste like? How does it change the experience of drinking a Flying Embers beverage?
Think of the difference between a soda or a cheap sparkling wine and a proper champagne that is bottle conditioned. Although we don't let the fermentation continue in the can and therefore, quote unquote, bottle condition, we are using the CO2 that came from the fermentation. And so it has very much a bottle conditioned flavor effect. So the bubbles are a little smaller and more delicate in the way that a really nice champagne has that brissante. It also, the commercial CO2 does have a tinny metallic sort of a flavor that adds a little bit of a bite. Mm-hmm. And normally you don't notice it, but once we started doing side by sides, once you've then tasted the naturally carbonated and you go back to the commercially carbonated, that's when you really notice the difference. And especially with our fruit flavors like watermelon and some of our berry flavors, it really brings out the jamminess of it. It's a beautiful effect.
So you're not wasting CO2. What other ways is Flying Embers working to reduce its waste?
One of the things that I introduced here was can collars. So these are cardboard ways of keeping cans together in a 4 or a 6-pack.
Right.
When we started off, we were working with small volumes, and you just have to buy what's available. So we used what are called pack tech. These are plastic rings that hold your cans together, and they're pretty thick plastic. They're one-time use, and so it's just a big waste cycle. I saw the cardboard rings, thought it was a great idea. Initially, there was some hesitancy around it. Well, how is cardboard going to hold up when we have condensation? How's it going to hold up under different, heat and cold temperatures? It goes from somebody's car into their refrigerator and then back to the beach. How is that? Is the cardboard going to turn to pulp? And I was in Europe, in the Netherlands, visiting family, but then I also went to a canning company over there, and they had the cardboard rings. And I saw that it was very feasible. And not very long after that, Coca-Cola Europe announced that they would use it for their cans in Europe. And I realized that if a company like Coca-Cola has done the due diligence to give this a thumbs up of approval, mm-hmm. then it must be feasible. So we now use it for our direct-to-consumer programs, our DTC. So any purchases that are made online through flyingembers.com, through our web shop, it gets sent to people with those collars. We use cardboard boxes for the rest of our cans that go out to distributors. And then I personally am looking forward to other initiatives. I'm very fascinated by anything that has to do with mycelium. I think there's some really, really interesting technologies. And it's funny to say technology because we're talking about something.
Fungi.
Yeah, exactly. It's so biological. But it's beautiful the things that they're coming up with. They're coming up with composite materials. They're coming up with sort of plastics. They're coming up with sort of leathers, but all made by mushroom. And I'm looking forward to working with some of that initially, maybe for some packaging material. I'm thinking definitely anything that is sort of relationship gifts or carrying bags or any of that kind of stuff.
Now, let's talk about some of the general problems of making lots and lots of canned beverages as you grow your company. You're going to want to reduce the resulting impact on the environment. So tell me, why are aluminum cans the best choice for your product today?
Aluminum cans are, from what I've seen, the most recyclable packaging material. I looked up some information that says 105,784 aluminum cans are recycled each minute. And it leads to a recycling rate of nearly 50%, the highest recycling rate of all beverage containers.
Yeah, here in the United States, however, overseas, it can be as high as 88 and 92%. So it's also putting some kind of a recycling program in place. Are you exploring how to encourage recycling, not only of the cans, but of the packaging too?
Not yet. We're looking for a good, strong partnership with a can manufacturer. We're looking toward can manufacturers who have a similar mindset as we do for us to partner up with and to develop programs with. We are a young company. We only have, a certain amount of bandwidth. And like, I said, for me, this is a real passion. I do take it very seriously. But I would love to, as they say, stand on the shoulder of giants. So, I'd like to find partnerships with people who already have done a lot of the research or have already gathered a lot of the information and learn from them.
So partnership, and I think that's one of the underlying challenges here is most companies try to do everything and keep everything to themselves. But in the biologically centered economy that we were talking about a moment ago too, it really requires systemic collaboration to not only make interesting and sustainable products, but then recycle them later on in life. One of the other big scaling challenges is you're going to use more water and you're going to produce more CO2 because you just are selling more product. What are your next steps to reduce your water and carbon footprint as you grow?
As far as the carbon footprint, the first steps right now continue to be the capturing of the CO2 and using that. Other than that, it becomes, looking at supply chain issues and figuring out, smarter and better ways to ship product. As far as water use, that's something that we haven't really put our fingers on yet.
Well, now, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say at the moment we don't, we try to keep all of our waste to a real minimum, and that's both because it's it's a resource, and being in California, you're always aware of what an important resource it is, and in a way it's money always becomes a driving factor as well, right? So one department might say, hey, I want to do this because I think it's the right thing to do for the planet. I think it's the right thing to do morally. But if you get people on board who say, hey, this is actually the right business decision, we should really do this, then we all know, let's not be naive about it. The money factor always weighs into it as well. So once you start getting people on board who say, hey, actually, if we really make sure that we track our water use, therefore our bills go down, then that's only more and more help from the rest of the team.
Now, you mentioned direct-to-consumer sales earlier, the fact that people can order online and get it shipped from your location rather than going to retail. Is the direct-to-consumer model a potential platform for a more sustainable beverage life cycle? You can establish a tight relationship with all these passionate kombucha drinkers. Can you get them also to participate in programs to send back their their cans, their packaging and so forth, or at least get it somewhere local so that you can accelerate your progress towards net zero production and distribution by collaborating with your customers to ensure that you have a true circular economy under development. It's not obviously accomplished. Does that factor into your thinking about how you become a completely sustainable net zero company?
Yeah, I think if I look at something like that, my initial impulse would be to really look at partnering up with the consumer in education and showing them, where they can recycle, how to recycle, much more than sending it back. I do think that a lot of the, also during COVID, there's been so much product has been gone to, Amazon and services like that, where it seems like there's a lot of driving back and forth to deliver you a strawberry flavored eraser. That there's a big carbon footprint on all the shipping also. So I personally wouldn't be a proponent of shipping back aluminum cans so I can recycle them. Okay. It'd be much more interesting for me to partner up with the consumers and do an educational outreach.
Okay, I think that's perfectly fair. It's going to be a challenge for everybody to put some form of enhanced recycling system in place. And if we can all collaborate to do that, then there's real opportunities for improvement. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, but can you give us some advice before we finish up? What would you try amongst your different kombuchas right now? What do you suggest is the first taste for our listeners?
Obviously, taste is subjective. We have a variety of alcohol levels. I personally really like our grapefruit tangy. It's a higher ABV. It's a 8.5 alcohol by volume. It has a really nice combination. I mentioned earlier how we try and find complexity in flavor. This one has the tartness of the kombucha, which of course supports the tartness of the grapefruit, but then the grapefruit transitions over into a sweetness. And then with the tangy, which is a hop, it actually gives it some real nice earthiness. And I know this is not a flavor, but that's what comes to mind for me, a very green sort of a taste.
Nice. We will, I will try it. I will order it myself. I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us, Caspar.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mitch.
Folks, we've been speaking with Caspar Poyck. He's the co-founder and senior director of plant operations at Flying Embers, a Ojai, California-based hard kombucha company. And you can check them out at www.flyingembers.com. They have a subscription service. We suggest you try it out. Check out the natural CO2 flavor. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we're going to be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, would you take a few minutes and share this podcast with your friends? We want to get people talking about sustainability, not just in their purchases, but in their companies, in their life, and in their work. This is a mission, folks, we all have to pull together to make a sustainable economy. So please do share the show. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. We'll be back soon.